May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you.
May you travel safely, arrive refreshed, and live your time away to its fullest. Return home more enriched and free to balance the gift of days which call you.
Thank you. Beautiful, isn't it? Who here has taken a pilgrimage with First Pres? So quite a few of you. So as we talk today, I did prepare some slides, which is very unlike me, but I did it. And just jump in on anything that moves you. Those of you that have done this, any of you that have questions that haven't, don't wait for Q&A at the end, although we'll do that too. But I'm not sure how long this takes, so we're just going to go with it. I want to talk first about the history of pilgrimage as at First Pres. The first one is down here. We started this in 2010. Our interim pastor was Larry Ferris, and it was his idea that the resident ministers at the time should lead a pilgrimage to the community of Iona, Scotland. And so they led that first trip. I was just a passenger, a participant, a pilgrim with them. Had never taken a pilgrimage before, had no idea what a pilgrimage is. But it really started a great love that I have for doing this, and I think our congregation has seized upon as well. We went back to Iona a few times, and then in 2012, I was on sabbatical, and so a member here, Cindy Lambertys, and I went on the Camino de Santiago. We had just seen the movie The Way. Maybe some of you have seen that. And she suggested it since I was going to be on sabbatical. And we did that with an organization called Marley Camino. They did all of the legwork for us. And that really began the journey where we have gone back to the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James in Spain or Portugal now. I've gone 5 times. Some of you have gone twice, both on Spain and Portugal, and some of you have been once recently. I suspect we will go again in 2026, our 200th anniversary year, and it will probably go in the fall of that year. So if you have not done the Camino and you'd like to do that, keep in mind that that's kind of the working plan at this point. Along the way, we decided to try some different kinds of pilgrimages. The Camino is a particular kind of pilgrimage where you're on an ancient route and you end up worshiping in the cathedral. The Iona pilgrimage is not a walking pilgrimage, but moving to a community in the Inner Hebrides where you worship and work on an ancient site that's been restored in community working worship, and I'll come back to that. So those are different kinds of pilgrimages, but we were looking for something new. So in 2018, we went on the Via Francigena in Italy, which was quite interesting and very different. We did not have quite the support that we'd had on previous pilgrimages. We all made it fine. There were snakes and mud and some other things we hadn't planned for, but in the end, we all walked, which was about 75 miles. I also tried to highlight where other people have led these or where resident ministers have participated, because it's become something very important for our resident ministers to be able to do, should they choose to. In certain classes, none of them want to go on a walking pilgrimage. They might want to go to Iona, but they're just not into that walking part of it. Others are quite ready, like Hannah. And even Angela Rio in her little strappy sandals. She never did have hiking shoes, but she managed to walk all of it in those. And then we undertook the West Highland Way next, and that was in 2020, that should be 2019. That was right before the pandemic. You can see the pandemic slowed down our momentum, our progress on pilgrimage. We had to take a few years off. And then the West Highland Way came back, and that was led by Jay Sanderford in 2022. That was a men-only pilgrimage. Many of these pilgrimages have been women-only, if I've led them, and they were on the early side. But more recently, we've been doing more mixed gender pilgrimages, and that has worked very well for us at the same time. Any questions about these so far? You can see that we don't have one for 2024, but we are looking to the Dingle Way in Ireland in 2025. So that will soon be posted. That will be, there'll be 14 spots available on that, and it will be the first 14 that sign up when the link goes live. And I'll let you know at what day and time the link is going live. So if you wish to know more about that and sign up for it, you'll be able to do that at that moment. So why do we do this? What is pilgrimage? I do remember somebody saying to Dave Prentice Hires that it was just a bunch of white women of privilege who wanted to travel together. And I think it can have that can be the perception if you never engage in one or don't hear us talk about it or see how it's different from that. And so I brought a few quotes to share with you today, and some of you will have your own thoughts on this, but it's an intentional spiritual journey to travel to a place with sacred meaning. It's not a vacation, but it's an act of devotion with the goal of deepening one's faith and creating relationships. When we go on pilgrimage, I often ask people to try not to go ahead of time from the group and do vacations or stay late and do vacations. Sometimes that works out. You're spending all this money to go over to Europe. It works well for you to do that. But we strive as much as we can for the group to depart together and arrive back together because, again, it's not a vacation but a pilgrimage, and so we try to keep the group intact. It's not a requirement, but it's a recommendation. It's a physical journey. It's a holy journey. We're looking for God to nurture us. And over time, Christian pilgrims have historically done this. I think it's, in the Catholic realm, they are to go to Rome and Israel and Santiago. Those are theirs. But other people have taken other kinds of journeys. And there's a wonderful book that's, I'm sure, on that table over there called The Way is Made by Walking. And that's the text that Larry Ferris introduced to us, the first pilgrimage we ever took. The Way is Made by Walking. And it's become our foundational text for doing pilgrimages. We want you to read that book as you are beginning to undertake a pilgrimage with First Pres. We have lots of copies of it around now, so no need to buy it for yourself. But it is a Camino de Santiago kind of book, but he is a wonderful spiritual writer, and he helps us understand more deeply why we undertake this goal of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is the inner journey, not the outer one. The outer journey is a part of it. We need to go somewhere and get somewhere. When we go to Scotland, it involves planes, trains, buses, and ferries before we ever get to our spot. When we go to other countries, sometimes it's a little bit less involved than that. You cannot discount that the outward journey is a part of it, but the entire time you're doing it, you're trying to focus on this inner sense, this inner journey that you're on. And so in that way, all of life is a pilgrimage, and everything that we're experiencing can have a pilgrimage element. It's a journey to a holy place. Now, saints have walked there, and some of these, Via Francigena in Italy, the Camino de Santiago, Iona, clearly saints have walked there. When we went to Iceland in 2023, and when we went on the West Highland Way, I'm sure some of the people that walked there are saint-like, but those are not going to be on the list of pilgrimages that you're supposed to do if you're a person of faith. However, anything can become a pilgrimage when you approach it in a particular way. It's an opportunity this is so important, to travel light, to walk free of daily routines, to meet people, to celebrate creation. And you can't do a pilgrimage alone in our understanding of it. There are other people with you. The fellow pilgrims are exceedingly important to the experience, as those of you here can attest. But it also is an individual journey. So again, you're holding these two things in tension. When we go on our journeys, we invite people to spend time alone, even if they go with their spouse, to find time to be alone, perhaps to walk alone for part of the time, but also to be with and walk with others. And then, of course, to welcome the stranger who comes to be with them or near them. Let's see. You've heard the phrase thin place probably in worship. A lot of our ministers have used this to describe pilgrimages or particular sacred sites. A thin place was how the Celts defined a place where it feels like the space between earth and heaven is paper thin. And that is certainly true in Scotland in the Inner Hebrides, where you feel like you're kind of on the end of the earth. And lots of places in our lives have that kind of thin place feeling, whether or not we're on pilgrimage, but it's becoming aware of it. More quotes on pilgrimage. Okay, part of the work of a pilgrim is to be surprised. Those of you that have gone on pilgrimage with me know that I try not to give you all the details before we go. We want to hold something back. Also, I like not to know all the details myself, but part of pilgrimage is being present in the moment and adjusting to whatever comes your way. Not with negativity, but with surprise and welcome. And so the attitude of a pilgrim has to be one of go with the flow. I highlighted this, searching out places that encourage quietness and contemplative listening. And that's why I listed churches like the Santiago Cathedral, but also remote places, wilderness areas, the Highlands of Scotland, the otherworldly landscape of Iceland, and more. So if you're going on a Camino to Spain, on the Camino de Santiago, people that take that pilgrimage are trying to get to the Cathedral of Santiago, where the relics of St. James supposedly are. And there's a whole very involved story that I will not get into about how those relics ended up there. It's pretty unbelievable. But if you're Catholic, you better believe it. But I think this kind of made sense to me when I came across this again. We overcome the temptation to regard relics with suspicion. God will regard the pilgrim's reverence for a relic as veneration for what it represents, rather than what it is. So when I walk past the tomb that has St. James's body supposedly in it, maybe that's it, but it doesn't matter. It's the meaning of that. It's the meaning of what we're doing there. And part of it, I think you all would agree, is watching other people's devotion, their devoutness in going to these places. When we take specific pilgrimages, Iona and Santiago in particular, we are with a lot of people who, frankly, are a lot more holy than we are. You can just tell it when you're with them, and they are inspiring, and it's wonderful. We're trying to get that to rub off on us a little bit. But we know, we take our own pilgrimage. We know who we are. It's what we need to get out of it. But it's so inspiring to watch other people, some who have saved up a lifetime to take this particular Camino that they might be on, and to know that it means so much to them, their families, their faith. Might be different than what we're doing, but ours is a part of that. Of course, you know that for me, the reason I have done all of those pilgrimages that I've been a part of is because it's about building community. The spiritual journey is very important. The act of going on a pilgrimage is important, but it is what happens in these groups of people that we gather together. So if you were on the first Camino and you had never taken the Camino before, I think Marita was on that one, you know that those relationships became very important. When we got back from that Camino, Angie's husband died, and the Camino pilgrims were right there to come alongside her to help her walk through that next experience, the pilgrimage of grief that then she was on. And so there is this building up of community. I think there's upwards of 80 people in our church now that have been on a pilgrimage of some sort, either with me or Jay or someone else. And you can feel that when you're in worship. You can feel how that builds relationships between people that otherwise would not spend 16 hours a day together eating, talking about our bodily functions, toasting each other with beer and wine and those kinds of things. So, yeah, for 10 to 14 days. The last Camino was a full 14 days. So pilgrimage is not an end in itself. Everyone is on their own pilgrimage, even though we're doing it together. We talked about surprise, trying to leave the irritation behind. And there are moments when you're tired and there's plenty of irritation, but we work together with that and we support each other. Pilgrims, this last one, pilgrims often journey to the ends of the earth in search of holy ground, only to find that they have never walked on anything else. In the end, the experience of pilgrimage that you bring back, when we arrive back at the airport after we've been together for 10 days and we are ready to depart from each other, it's kind of that thought that your pilgrimage begins now. Now is when the pilgrimage really starts. That you've just been on it, you're back. What is it going to do in your life, with your faith, in our community, along the way? How is it going to transform how you view the everyday? God present with us on every journey. How does it shape that? So how do we prepare? And I like being able to talk about this because that idea that we're just a bunch of white women of privilege that want to travel together, I think for me, when I heard that, it made me realize we've not done a very good job of interpreting for the congregation what we do and how we're preparing for it. We meet for between 8 and 20 hours of meeting time. reading books, discussing them, having worship together, eating, building up a connection before we even go. And in every group of pilgrims, there are people that have never met. And often we have pilgrims that bring family members with them. So Nancy Jans Clark on one of these pilgrimages brought her 2 sisters. And it was very special to watch them do this together. We've had people that have brought a spouse along who's not a member. Or Jan is our great recruiter of our Catholic friends. And so we've had Chris Black and Mary Jane Trementine on several of our, and Deb Vanderbrook has been on. And actually, that's how Miss Ann Andrus came to be among us. She came, did you come on the Italy one first? And the fact that you came back for another one, I think is to your credit after the snakes and the mud of Italy. And now she's the moderator of our Board of Deacons. So if you're not a member, you should try this. But we have these meetings, and we really are just kind of getting to know each other and talking about and preparing. But once we get to the airport, I feel like things kind of change, because now we're going to be together. Now we're not just at a meeting trying to get home at the end of a long day. Now we're in it, and we're fully immersed. We often do training walks. The Arbor is a great place. Carol Gottliebson, by the way, if you ever do take a walking journey of any type, call her. She knows how to get you into shape and ready for this. Others among us that have practiced. When we first went on the West Highland Way, she had gone, I think she and her husband had gone like a couple of months before we went. In the summer, right? I don't remember exactly why they weren't with us, but they were on their own group. And she came back and said, y'all better get in shape. You are not prepared, trust me. And she was right, and she got all of us in our hiking boots out to the Arbor multiple times per week. And I really think we would have had a great challenge had it not been for that. That's true of Iceland as well. Yeah, she did. She did. And she's a person that will look up our route, and she'll map it, and she will tell you what the elevation gains are going to be per day. I tend to look at like, okay, is this going to be a grade 2 or a grade 3 hike? And if they say, oh, it's a grade 2.5, your people will be able to do it. I'm like, great. I don't need more information than that. Turns out I should have had more information before we went to Iceland, but we all got through it. I tend to trust it's going to be okay. But that was really so helpful to have Carol. She couldn't be here today, but she brought a whole table full of books so that you can see the kind of books that we read in preparation for pilgrimage. Then we have our readings, and we're discussing. We get commissioned in worship before we go. We have what's called tapas nights. Many times so if we're meeting once a month for a discussion, we'll also maybe later in the month meet up downtown somewhere, maybe the Earl, in the bar area. We might meet at Aventura or somewhere, and it's just purely social. We're going to sit in a circle. We're going to talk to each other, and just, again, trying to build those connections, talking about what's going on in our lives. And we're always talking about, how's your walking going? How are your feet? What boots are you wearing? Do you have poles? All of these are discussions around the walking pilgrimages. Going to Iona, the weather there, if you've ever been to the Inner Hebrides, it can be everything in one day. So you really have to pack and talk about what you're going to take, waterproofing, and also you have a limited size things that you can travel with. So that's a big part of going to Iona, is trying to understand what to take and what we need. And then on the pilgrimage, we commit to certain things. We have morning devotions, and those are led by you, the people that are on the pilgrimage. You get assigned to work with somebody else to create the devotion. I assign you generally to somebody you don't know very well. And then you will have a day assigned to you on that trip where you'll be leading the morning devotions. And then we have talk-back sessions in the evening. We try to do that before dinner and wine, because I find we get a lot better discussion. And in Spain, we don't eat dinner until like 8:30, 9 o'clock. So depending on which country we're in, that affects when we're going to have talk-back sessions and where we have them. There's a daily journal, and I'm going to show you a photo of some of those in just a moment, that I prepare ahead of time for the group, and ask them to follow along and to do their own journaling within the journal, or to take their own journal and do whatever they want to. It's not a requirement to do my journal, but I just feel that if we're going to go together, I need to prepare something. We always have a theme for every trip. We always have a t-shirt, and the journals and the scripture and the devotions tend to work with the theme. We do that as well as we can. And then we do have guides on many of our trips, and we try to plan for and be present to the guides. Those are very special relationships, right? You that have been on these. There's a few pictures in our slideshow, but they become really important to us. They are our lifeline in many ways. They are our foot doctors. They know how to deal with blisters. They know how to keep us on the path. And so our guides are very important, and then tipping them at the end is something that we also find very meaningful and important. I didn't mention this here, but generally at the end of every pilgrimages, there's some kind of banquet or closing dinner, our last night together in that country, and there are always awards. Everyone gets a special award, and that's a fun part of our time together. Some of you probably remember the award you got. These are some pictures of the journal. So this journal on the left was when we went on St. Oswald's Way. That was the Northumberland coast of England. That was 2022. We left on about May 17th, and I remember because my husband died on May 11th, and it still felt like I should go with the group, and that ended up being spiritually nurturing and comforting to be with these group of people in that place. The theme of that was going coastal for Christ. And then here's the West Highland Way. This was one of our devotional pages. We had a word every day that we were focused on, and that word that day was receive. There'd be a reading. And this would be day one of like 8 pages of material for that day. So the journals are pretty thick. I'm just showing you the first page. The Art of Pilgrimage was the theme of our pilgrimage in Santiago this past fall. And so I put together, multiple levels of that with something for every day. And this is part of page 1 and 2 from, I think this was probably the first pilgrimage that we did to Spain. Unfortunately, a lot of these blend together for me. So let's talk about the various places. Iona, Scotland. Who's been to Iona here? Great. What stood out for you about Iona, those that have been on pilgrimage there?
The thin place. I read about it, but I didn't understand it. And I was very, it came to me when the first thing when we arrived was a rainbow. And there were several rainbows over that week. But that thin place was something I couldn't understand until I was there. And it truly is a thin place.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, it was just train car. We sort of looked lost, and we met people who were around with the founding of Iona. There was a rainbow. We were all told to be nice, so we were nice. So we talked to a lot of them. And then that trip we took down with Alan, a person there who wanted us to convey a message to his wife who had died. And he couldn't walk to the end, so he asked us to do it. It was magical. I mean, a thin place is probably a better word, but it got so by the end of it, we just expected the world to open up in front of us, because that's what it had been doing for the past week.
The main part of Iona, it's about 50 people that get to stay in this particular area of Iona, and they work and worship together. And so you have a job. I don't remember what the titles were called. Angie, do you remember what we were either like the penguins or they were animal names, right? Puffins? Puffins was one. And so you're divided into 3 groups, and your group might be assigned to clean the bathrooms every day, and that's what you do. And you do it after worship together in the morning. The work flows out of the worship experience, and that's a part of the Celtic tradition that work and worship go together. It is pretty beautiful to be in that kind of community, eating together, working, preparing your meals. But it is not 5-star by any stretch of the imagination. The first time we went to Iona, I was in a part of it that the shower, like you would turn it on and it would either be scalding hot or ice cold. There was no in between. And it was pretty cold there, and so I was not too happy about that. But it was good. It was good for me and for us, and everybody else was there, had their own story of what they did while they were there, and trying to, again, experience the beauty of God's presence in nature. And here is a picture of one of the ruins on the Isle of Iona, part of the ancient monastery that stands there. now. And that place is supported by the Iona, like the Friends of the Iona community, members of the Iona community, and you can join and be a part of that. And then if you're a part of that, you have to commit to certain things that relate to Celtic Christianity, and then you might go 1 week a year and be with a group like ours to try to help us have the experience. And so I know that Dave and Mel want to take a group to Iona in the next couple of years, so I suspect that will be on the agenda. It is not something you have to be physically able to walk a big distance to do. This is the kind of pilgrimage for people that don't want to walk 100 miles. And it will, again, it will be happening. The limitation that we have is because there's only 50 people that they have there, they don't want First Pres bringing 20 people. They'll let us bring 10. So it's a kind of a smaller group that goes to the Iona community. Other thoughts or remembrances of being on Iona?
I remember knowing that it was a little rougher, like you said, and so we shouldn't expect to have the comforts of home. And so I got up top bunk, and first night, and there was a pretty scratchy blanket there, and I thought, well, this will be sufficient. Okay, they told me to be prepared. Well, it took me another night or two to discover there was another softer blanket underneath.
No. Good to look around. We did have a talent show there too. Were you there when we were the Sconettes? Anybody Sconettes here? Yeah, there was a lot of scones, and we had to sing, so we became the Sconettes, and we did the talent show, which was really fun. Sconettes? Oh, we said Sconettes. You could tell.
Church clothes had a whole new meaning because we met every day for church, and it was cold. So cold.
It's cold there, depending on when you go, and it could be raining the whole time too.
Scarf helped.
Lots of tea, lots of scones, and the food was it's remarkable there. So it's a great community to go to if you have a chance. Even if you're going to Scotland and you can take the ferry over and visit the Iona community for a day, or stay overnight at the hotel that's there, it's well worth going to Iona to experience their worship service, to walk into the community and see the ruins. The Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, is in Spain and Portugal, but there are other parts and other ways that you can get there. You ultimately want to end up at the Santiago de Compostela, the cathedral in Spain, where, again, the relics of St. James are supposedly there for worship. And at the end of today in this class, Jan brought the video of a part of that worship service to show to you, so you'll get a feeling for why we want to go there and be there in worship on this particular day. We go on this trip with the help of a group called Marley Camino. They arrange for all of our lodging. They are with us all day. They have a bus that they keep nearby, so that if let's say in 3 days we would walk 12 miles, the next day 14, the next day 11, and that gets to be about 8 days. So by the time you get to day 3 or 4 or 5, you may not want to walk 14 more miles. So the bus is there. There's help for us. They arrange everything that we need. Again, I mentioned they do foot care, and they're just marvelous. They keep the spirit of the group up and are just such meaningful people, right, Anki? We loved Bea and Esther, who's been there now, I think 5 or 10 years. This shows you the different routes to Santiago. So the main one is the French way, and that's what most people take. But you can go from lots of different places to walk to Santiago, and you're always looking for, and I don't think I have a picture of it up here, but you're always looking for the sign of the shell. I have it here. This is the shell sign. You're always looking for this, a yellow arrow on a blue background. That will tell you which direction, help you to stay on the right path. I know you all took lots of pictures of various kinds of shells, and that's an important part of not getting lost on the way. The origin comes back from the 9th century. This tells you a little bit about that. King Alfonso was the one who started this idea of honoring the apostle, and little did he know this little cathedral chapel would grow into what it is today. And it is pretty stunning to see the Santiago Cathedral. If you have a chance to go there, even if you're not walking, just step onto the Camino and walk a few steps and feel the meaning of what has happened there, what's been going on. Since that movie came out, The Way, so the Camino was very popular with Catholics for a long time, and then the movie The Way came out with Martin Sheen That was like 2011. And suddenly the Camino exploded. So there's something like 600 or 700,000 people that walk it every year, or a portion of it every year. It's not a small amount. And so it's become much more commercialized since it used to be. There's more places to stop and get coffee or buy tchotchkes or whatever. And you sort of, it makes being a pilgrim a little more challenging. You have to kind of, right, Tamara, you have to kind of block some of that out and decide what you're going to take part in. But it is still the same in that you're meeting people walking and hearing their story and how they ended up there and where they're going to be staying each night. And that's kind of a part of that journey. This is the cathedral where we're aiming to end up for worship. A part of going with Marley Camino is that Marley is a woman who started this company after her divorce. It's now grown. It's a worldwide company. She does other trips in other places, but this was the original, and it's family owned. And Marley takes very good care of us. But one of the ways she takes care of her groups is that she knows when worship in the cathedral is going to involve the swinging of the giant bottifumario or incense burner. You're going to see that at the end from Jan. That does not happen every day. It doesn't even happen every Friday. But when it does happen, we are there. When we are there, it does happen. And I've been told that's because Marley is a very good supporter of the Catholic Church, and she brings a lot of groups there. So when we arrange for a trip, I know they guarantee that we will experience that in worship at that time. A lot of people travel the Camino. They spend 3 months walking. They spend 3 months with everything on their back and sleeping in a dorm room. And they get to the cathedral and they experience worship, but they don't have that experience. And that's a sadness for me, but it is quite the thing that you're going to see that happens there with the incense burner. They just can't do it every day. Along the way, you have to have your credentials so that you can prove that you did the Camino and get your certificate. This is an example, a little book, and then on the inside, you get these stamps at various places along the way. How many stamps did we have to have every day? Minimum of two, and some. But the more stamps you got, the better. So you wanted to be able to stop and get some stamps. Now, on our trip this fall, I think we all found that we wanted to get stamps, but it was raining. It was always raining. And so to stop and have to get your big yellow poncho off and get out your credentials and find a stamp was sometimes a little more than it was worth getting an extra stamp that day. But a lot of people come back with us and they have it framed, or they have somehow the way that they remember taking this journey. This is the official document you end up with at the end. If you've done a minimum, you have to do the last 100 kilometers of the Camino. So if you do 100 kilometers on the front half of it and then you drive to Santiago, you're not getting this. It requires the last 100 kilometers by foot, bike, horseback, or boat. And that's slightly different for each one of those. But for foot, like us, last 100 kilometers. And this goes back to the Middle Ages. This is also something that people feel great about having. I don't know if anybody brought it today, but we often have it framed with our credentials. This is one of our logos here that we did in 2016. Mary Jones designed that for our t-shirt. And this gives you a sense of what the itinerary would be. This was for the Portugal one. I think this might be from the fall. Yeah, this was from this past fall. We arrived in Lisbon on the 17th or so. We met our guides, and then we had a little bit of, I won't say sightseeing because these were spiritual sites, but Marley took us to Fatima and some other places, and then we started our walk, and you can just see 11.8 miles, 10.2 miles, 9.7, 12.3, 13.3, and 11.6, followed by 11.3, and then the last day we just walked into Santiago. But that's what you're training for. That's why we plan a year ahead of time. You could easily walk 11 miles today, but could you do it 8 days in a row? It does take some building up, especially with your shoes and your blisters and things like that. This is the Via Francigena in Rome that we did in 2018. It was beautiful. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful pilgrimages I think we've done, and through Tuscany. But again, our support, we went with a different company. Marley does not work there. I found a company online. Our guide I was not her favorite person. She was not mine. That's a part of the surprise of pilgrimage, is you don't know what's going to happen, and you have to adjust to it and try to find the meaning that God has for you in the midst of that. And we certainly did find a lot of meaning being in Italy together and doing this walking pilgrimage. It was also not quite as we weren't as pampered of a pilgrims as we'd been on some other journeys, so we needed to take care of our own needs a little bit more. You might be wondering, where do we go to the bathroom? Who can answer that? Right behind that tree. We've said going forward for future walking pilgrimages, you're going to have to prove to me that you can go to the bathroom outside before we take you, because we've had some people that it was their first time on the pilgrimage, and it's a little unusual, but you have to sometimes do that. Nature calls. Nature calls when you're in nature.
When you were walking and maybe by yourself and you hadn't seen a sign for a while, but you went behind the bushes to pee, you always knew that you were on the right path. Because there was a lot of
Not everyone picked up that.
Yeah, you're supposed to pick up after yourself.
That was good, because that was another sign. If you couldn't find it, you couldn't find the star. Look on their shoulder, told you it's a different kind of marker.
I think every one of us that's been on a trip has had to squat behind the bush, because you're drinking coffee in the morning. You're just not always going to find what you need. You need to drink water the whole time, of course, as well. Weather can be all over the place. This was the West Highland Way. This just gives you a sense of the route that we took. 96 miles. There was a high pointed elevation called Devil's Staircase. That was why we were really glad we trained in the Arb. And we work with a group in Scotland and England on these trips called HF Holidays. You all could take an HF Holidays trip anytime if you check their websites. Nancy was on that one with us in England. They are just marvelous. They have guides who are volunteers that have walked all over the world, but especially in England, and they come and they spend their week with us. Out of the goodness of their heart, they spend their week with us, helping us. And in this kind of trip, we are walking together the entire time. On other trips, like the Camino, you can take your own pace, because you know the bus is going to show up later. But on this one, we have to stay together, and people walk at different paces. And so this is a part of the pilgrimage here, is to slow down, and you're only going to go as fast as the slowest person. You're not going to be able to run ahead and have that kind of experience of waiting for them. The guide will make you wait, and the guide knows how to get us through those kinds of challenges. This is the group as we started the West Highland Way. I think that's our first day. You can see a lot of smiles. We were Diane Sonda from Blue Ocean Church was with us on this one. Happy to have her, as well as Chris Black. This is Iceland. This was this past summer, and it really looks like this. Wow. These are pictures of what we saw, and that was the sacred part of this, was the beauty. I think, Anki, wouldn't you say the beauty of the otherworldly nature of it, and just the experience of traveling in such close contact, but there was no bad vista around the corner. There was nothing that was not good to look at. This was our t-shirt designed by Esther. This was the first one she did for me. So of course you always have a t-shirt, and that tells you who was on this trip as well. And then this tells you where we went. We went from hut to hut, and it was all arranged that we would have space in the hut with occasional showers. It was challenging. This was the most rugged and challenging pilgrimage we've ever done. I would love to do it again if anybody wants to, but we do have to prepare and be ready for the rugged nature of it. It's pretty awesome. Lots of presence of God there. Here we are on our way to one of our huts. Okay, so this is a quote from Barbara Eichmuller, who couldn't be here, but she went to Iceland this summer, and she said, "The pilgrimage far surpassed any expectations I had. The key to our success, 16 of us, was the camaraderie. 2 days after we arrived in Reykjavik, we met our guides, Stefan, Magnus, and a dog, Fenris. We just fell in love with all three of them. To hike in the mountains, not what we expected. It was a lot more difficult. Ups, steep downs. Lot of work on the knees. Definitely you had to use poles. Cowboy coffee without electricity, sharing our resources together, packing and repacking. Barbara was a master at that. Lessons, helping each other. We had a couple people on this trip who are not in the room. Sharon Watling was one of them, Carla Olsen-Belfi. For those of us that realized, this is going to be a lot harder than we thought. We have people, this ranged in age from probably 53 to 78. And so all of a sudden, your knees have to do it. And they were very good at helping us as fellow pilgrims, morning stretching, dry socks, crossing rivers and streams. The most poignant moments were at the very top of the mountain when we stood in silent prayer to experience God's presence. And I remember, Anki, do you talk about what happened on that one mountain when we went up? Do you remember when you met her?
Oh, yes, there was well, I can't remember when it first encountered. No, I know. I was debating whether I wanted to go up to that extra little part going up the mountain. And then a couple of people had gone ahead, you and Shauna, and they said, "You've got to come up. There's a woman from Holland here." So we spoke in Dutch. And she was on the same route, and so we would see her periodically.
Along the way.
She was just by herself, a young woman, 24, just,
Really
it was
cool.
very special.
Really cool who you get to meet. This is Carol Gottliebsen's quote. Pilgrim's journeys have truly been a way to find both the steady, ever-deepening walk and talk with my faith in God. Through the readings, the scenery, the songs we do sing together, the stories. With each one I am sad at the end, but when on that journey home, also feel so surrounded by peace and love and faith. I think that everyone should experience it. It is so much more than walking. All right, so these are just some of the blessings and prayers that we start with when we go, and if you want any of these, I will send them to you. And so these are just some questions. I want to ask the pilgrims who are here to share a little bit about maybe what you hoped it would be like and maybe what it was or wasn't, and any experience that's been lasting for you, especially those that have gone on more than one. What compelled you to do another one? Are you ready to do another one? Who wouldn't do it again? Things like that. Anybody want to jump in?
Well,
I'll just pass this around to you, just for the sake of Bill. He'll be happy to pass this.
I first went to Iona. It turned out to be an all-women's, even though it wasn't intended to be, and there was a great relationship among all the women on this, so we actually sort of pushed for another woman's pilgrimage the next year. My husband was still alive on that first pilgrimage, and he encouraged me to go. The next one came along was Santiago, and he wasn't encouraging me to go on that. I think because he wanted to go too, and he couldn't do it because physically he couldn't do it. So we went on. I did not sign. I thought about it and did not sign up. And then he died that January before the pilgrimage. So Mel, good old Mel, she says, "Oh, pray about it, Angie. You should come with us." And every time I saw her, "Well, pray about it, Angie." So I prayed about it. And I decided to go on that. And that was a very moving experience for me. We went in August, I believe. And so he had died in January. And I found him along the way, and I was surprised. First, my husband loved cemeteries. And we wandered through a cemetery. And that brought him to me. And then I was very surprised when we got to the church, to the cathedral, and we went up to kiss the top of St. James. And I was surprised that I realized I was sharing this with my husband, and it brought me to tears. Another time that this really connected with me is when we went to the shore to the last spot in Europe that Finisterre. And again, I had this connection, and I wasn't expecting these connections. So that was a very important part of that pilgrimage for me.
Historically, thank you. And you brought your daughters on one of the other ones as well, which was really nice. Historically, when you got to Santiago, the ancient pilgrims would keep walking all the way to Finisterre, where they would burn their clothes because they hadn't showered for many months. And we did go to Finisterre, but it's literally on the coast, and it's very hard. If the weather's bad, you can't see anything, and it was bad the day we were there, but it was still very special to know where people threw their shoes off the side of the cliff and stuff like that.
And we took a bus.
We took a bus. We didn't keep walking. Other people with thoughts about pilgrims who've been on? Anybody to share? I'd love to hear from you.
I just would, we have wonderful fellowship in our group, but we also have an opportunity as a group to behave well and to make a favorable impression. So we kind of converted our guide in England to us. It was a rocky start, and then, but Mel was particularly determined we were going to soften this guy. And I think we did at the end. Of course, a big tip at the end helped. But also we had some other people join us for the final worship. And the idea of, the feeling of ecumenism, when you join with other people of faith and who express a desire to join us. So I found that rather moving. Yeah.
What was the name of our guy?
I don't know, I can't remember. Except he was awful grumpy at the
Dave.
start.
Yeah, well, so this poor man, he shows up to be a guide for HF Holidays. He knows he's meeting a group at the place where we're staying, and they did not tell him it was a group of church ladies. So this is in his 60s, English guy, probably, not a person of faith. Probably had a lot of ideas about American women of faith, Christians. And so we had to really kind of break him down, and he was very standoffish. The first time he introduced to us, and Sid Smith said something like, "Well, tell us a little bit more about you." And he was like, "Why? Why would I tell? I don't know. Why would I tell you anything?" Something like that. I was like, "Oh man, we're in for it." But yeah, they broke him down, and he wanted to take us on our next trip whenever we did it, but we've not yet connected with him on the second one.
Impressed him.
Impressed him. Anyone else want to talk about it?
I was going to say the same thing about Iceland, that it's a really secular country, and our guides Magnus and Stefan, I don't think the dog cared, but Magnus and Stefan both said that they were nervous about a bunch of religious pilgrimage there, and then they started joining in with us with our reflections and stuff, and
that was cool.
they were the ones that said climb to the top of the mountain and just sit there silently, and I don't know that they ran off and joined Fast Track versus Presbyterian Reykjavik, but I think I think we helped them.
Yeah, it did make a difference. Others? Jen?
I always find that there's something very connected between the physical and the spiritual when we go on these. That it is very physical, but whether you're walking alone or you're walking with someone else or growing a connection, I think there's something very close there, and that physical also makes you think more deeply about where you are and who you're with, and that closeness, I think, to God. So I think having that combination is very meaningful.
I'm sorry. So I hadn't joined the church before pilgrimage, but I was Mel a long time, and so I was invited to apply, and luckily I got to go. So I had strange hopes. I mean, I didn't have great expectations, but I just really was being unsure. I was just really unsure of what it would be like, and then my fear was I wouldn't be able to physically do it because I'm not an athletic person. I did do the training. If I had advice to give, it would be start training sooner, train with more elevation. But what it actually was is I met wonderful people and I became part of a wonderful community. And now it's right back here at First Pres, and so it really was wonderful. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned something about the guides. We had 2 guides in 2018, and then when we went last fall, one of the guides from 2018 was with us. And so it was like being back with an old friend. And then I can't remember which day it was, we were having lunch, and lo and behold, the other guy from 2018 was in the same restaurant. So we had this reunion, and I spent quite some time with him, lying on my back with my feet against the wall while he dealt with my feet. But it was more than just Marley, it's a Marley family. We just felt we were part of this, part of this family. But they were really just wonderful people, and everything just was so well organized, and the bus driver also was an extremely nice person. I think he was a local from Lisbon, wasn't he? But it certainly, I mean, both pilgrimages were just amazing.
And you've done one with your wife, and you've also done one without your husband. So you've had both experiences. Did you like one better than the other?
She went twice with me.
Only once a month. I'm putting Carolyn on. Jan.
Well, I think for me, being outside and being in nature, the spiritual experience of that, and then being with people that you love or come to love, it's really great.
Okay, well, I've been on 3. The first one, I was a complete newbie and really afraid, just like you were saying, whether I was able to do it. And I love Italy, so that was my main connection that I wanted to go. Snakes excluded. And it was so beautiful, and I felt so moved by the end that that's when I came home and joined First Pres officially. And then Northumberland, you know, I knew some of the people. The countryside was spectacular. I felt like there were signs that said "mind the bull" or something like that, so you had to be careful of the fields. But I think the guide, who we did sort of convert by the end, because Mel told me, "Ann, you're going to write a song for him." I was like, "Oh,
right." She's good at that, though.
Well, I didn't know I was, but there was a thin line there because I got up really early. I think the morning we were supposed to do it, and I thought, okay, and I went down to have this beautiful porch and just prayed about it, and honestly, I felt like the words just came out.
It was wonderful.
It was fun.
We sang him
It
a
was
song.
fun.
And he loved it.
Yes.
He said he was gobstoppered. And then the last one, it was another Mel moment when I said, I don't think I'm going to go on Portugal. She goes, I think you can do Iceland. I was like, oh, sure.
Well,
You did, so you did.
It was, I will say, the hardest thing I've ever done physically. It was also, I feel like, monumental. The people, I feel like a bond with everybody, in all of them, but this one in particular, because you literally were sleeping right
We know who snores at this church. We know who snores at this church.
Yes, I willed myself not to get up and go to the bathroom because I didn't want to step on people. But I think one of the best things, and that was one of the last nights, it wasn't Magnus. Who was the other? Stefan. Stefan is quite an accomplished singer. And I remember all of us gathering, including other people in the huts, and he sang and played the guitar and sang, and it was an amazing moment of doing it. So it was pretty special.
So let me just talk about a couple things here. One of the things we do in a daily devotion, this came from our first trip to Santiago, and Angie Miller sewed this and stitched it for us. She had us, for our morning devotion, draw our hand on a piece of paper, and then she took our hands and stitched them onto this and put some of the scriptures here that we used on that trip. And this, one of the members of our group was Susie Reynolds. She's in this picture. And after we got back, this was done, and not too many years after this, Susie was diagnosed with cancer. And she had this with her, wrapped around her for much of her time with cancer, and she died. And so her family funded the church, the Susan Rose Reynolds Pilgrimage Fund. So these are expensive journeys. Obviously, when we go to Spain for 2 weeks, it's not going to be $1,000. But the trips range in price, and the Susan Rose Reynolds Fund will help defray some of the cost for people that wouldn't be able to do this otherwise. We also try to make sure that staff can participate. I couldn't do these trips without the support of the church and the members who go on these trips, supporting staff being on them. Same thing for resident ministers. But that's an important piece of it. So I want you to know about Susie. She's in many of our pictures. She went on 3 pilgrimages, I think, Jan? She went on 3, right?
Iona, Spain,
And Portugal, yeah. And we were getting ready for the Portugal pilgrimage when she was died. Just like, we were at the first meeting, and she came out of that meeting and said, I have this lump here. And Mark Lindley was at that meeting, and he said, you need to get that checked out. And it was a year later that we went, after she completed her first round of chemotherapy and things like that, some surgery. But we all felt very drawn to that experience with her. And of course, she lives on every time we take a pilgrimage. We also have these photo books that different people have put together. I picked up the Northumberland one because I didn't make much mention of this particular trip from 2022. But all the books are over there, and I think Jen has put most of our picture books together when you've been on a trip. If you've not been on it, it's been Angie or someone else that has taken the lead on putting a book together. We've not yet got the Iceland one together, but Barbara Eichmuller's working on that. And then we all have a chance to purchase it if we want to. And usually, like Jen has purchased one for the church, and Jen and Dave have done that, and it's out there in the lounge so that you can look through it sometime, and we hope to stimulate pilgrimage. Any questions before we get to our last piece?
Tell me the ages. What's the oldest person who's taken a pilgrimage?
The oldest person we've taken has been 80, 81. And you know, and they've been on the long walking pilgrimages. That's where it helps having.
About Maya.
I think Maya was about 79 or 80.
More.
No,
More than that? Was she 83?
She was 80.
80.
No, she was.
And what about Jean Long?
And Jean was older than that. She was
And they
84 or
didn't,
5.
you know, well, Maya walked the whole time. Maya Savarino in her silver cowboy hat and cowboy boots walked the Camino with her little purse under her arm. She became a legend on the Camino to the other pilgrims. But other people, when they've been, I mean, anybody, you know, one man had some issues with his hip and he ended up riding the bus more than walking. Other times, you know, there are ways that you don't have to be as physical and you can still experience these journeys. So, but we do try to make sure we have those things put into place so that you can complete it. We want you to be successful and feel that you've done what you wanted to do to make it your own pilgrimage. Yeah, mostly our upper range has been about 80, 81. And we haven't had a lot of young moms or young dads. We've had a couple along the way that were able to do this and leave their kids for a week or two. But as you can imagine, that's pretty difficult for them. So we have a pilgrimage planning group that's meant to try to plan more local pilgrimages and maybe some more affordable options for people. And that work is ongoing. So I hope you'll hear more about that as we get to our 200th anniversary as a church. Jan's going to play us a little bit of the, hopefully this works out, a little bit of the experience of worship at the Santiago Cathedral, which if you see the movie The Way, you'll also get a sense of this.
So for me, this was like the best part. I hope I can play it for you because it's the ending, in the cathedral. Like the length of a football field, this incense is going, and these monks are pulling this rope that's making it go, and then the nuns are singing, and it's just breathtaking.
And that Bada Funerio or incense burner is about the size of a small car, and the priests all have to be very highly trained to do that because you can imagine if they get it wrong. We're sitting on the inside aisle of these pews. And it could easily take somebody out. So it is pretty stunning to do that. The history of that is that after the pilgrims would come, they'd been walking for 6 months or whatever, they would smell really bad because there was no showers back then. And so this would be the incense that would clear the bad aromas away and give them the good aromas. And then they would go on to Finisterre and burn their clothes and discard their boots. But they still do this. Usually it's once a week or sometimes a little bit less than that. But that's one of those really special moments, and I'm so glad Jan got that on video for us to share that. Any questions for the Pilgrims or comments for those that are here that have done this? Anything else you want to add today?
I just want to say how much I like this book, The Art of Pilgrimage, and every time I've gone on one, I've read it, and it's worth reading whether you're doing one a long walk or just around town. It's a wonderful book and really gives you a lot of spiritual guidance.
The Art of Pilgrimage. Be sure to take a look at the books and the artwork that we brought today. Graham.
Well, I just wanted to say that Marley organized everything so that in the cathedral we were right up at the front.
Yeah.
And this was zooming past.
Yeah, it turns out it helps to know certain people. I hope in the end what we've done is to show a little bit more of the breadth of what pilgrimage is. It's not just a walking trip. There's so much more that goes into the preparation and the experience after. I think if we don't keep these relationships going and these connections, I'm thankful for all the pilgrims that are here. You will find if you have a chance to do any kind of pilgrimage like this with us that it deepens your relationship with other members of the church, but ultimately your relationship with God, who we know best in one another. We know most fullest in one another. So thanks everyone for being here, and I hope you'll be on future pilgrimage with us soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really nice.
Well,